Many theologians believe objective morality cannot exist without a God. For example, the moral argument goes like this. Premise 1, without a God, there is no objective basis for morality. Premise 2, morality is objective. Conclusion, therefore, there is a God. Why do theologians believe that you need to have a God to have objective morality? Well, to understand this, we first need to understand what theologians mean by objective. The term objectivity can be used in three different senses. The first is conceptual objectivity, which would be something that we can know just by thinking about it or something we all agree upon. For example, 1 plus 1 equals 2, triangles have 3 sides, cubes have 12 edges, or a bachelor is defined as an unmarried man. The second kind of objectivity is empirical objectivity or scientific objectivity, which means simply something exists independent of our personal experience, intuitions, or biases. For example, all scientific discoveries. Take, for example, the sun exists. We can all go verify the sun exists by looking at it, and we can do empirical tests to verify certain things about the sun, as an example. However, we could all exist in the matrix, in which case all scientific discoveries, even though they are empirically objective, are still subjective in some other sense because they're only true within the matrix. This other sense would be metaphysical objectivity. Metaphysics is the study of the fundamental nature of reality. So if something is metaphysically objective, that means it exists as a part of the fundamental nature of the reality, and so it's not just the product of a delusion or the matrix. Therefore, even though every scientific discovery can be empirically objective, like the sun exists, it may still be metaphysically subjective. When theologians talk about objective morality, they mean it in the metaphysical sense, as in the true nature of reality, regardless of whether or not it can be known. This is opposed to an empirical objective morality, which would be something like what Sam Harris argues for, which is an idea of well-being that is hypothetically empirically measurable in the brain. Even if such an empirically objective basis existed, this would still be metaphysically subjective, just like the sun example. So when theologians talk about objective morality, they mean it in the same sense as their God, as some kind of absolute, indefeasible trait of the true nature of reality that can't just be a delusion or product of the matrix. So are theologians correct that atheism cannot supply a metaphysically objective basis of morality? Well, no. They are sort of correct in the fact that atheism doesn't suppose such a basis exists, but it also doesn't presuppose one does not exist. Just as objective morality can be grounded in the metaphysical theory of theism, it can also be grounded in any of the alternative metaphysical theories such as deism, pantheism, pandeism, panpsychism, cosmism, naturalistic pantheism, which is atheism, Pastafarianism, or an evil god, just to name a few. Therefore, just like theists can assert a metaphysical grounding for their morality in theism, atheists can assert a metaphysical grounding for their morality in naturalistic pantheism. For example, naturalistic pantheism can argue for an objective grounds of morality in some kind of a super law of nature, simply one we haven't discovered yet. So what would this kind of atheistic model of metaphysically objective morality look like? This kind of atheistic metaphysical objective morality can be defined as all wills and beings have sovereignty over themselves and total freedom to achieve their wills so long as they do not infringe upon the sovereignty of other wills without those wills' consent. We may refer to a world that can accommodate such a state of affairs as the best of all possible worlds for all possible wills. Based on this definition of objective morality, an immoral value can be defined as the desire to impose involuntary restrictions onto unwilling participants. An immoral action would be any action that imposes such involuntary restrictions onto unwilling participants. It's important to note that these restrictions can be imposed by moral agents, but they can also be imposed by the environment itself. For example, if a rock falls and hurts someone against their will, that world would be immoral compared to the best of all possible worlds, where that series of events can't happen. So what would this best of all possible worlds for all possible worlds look like? In such a world, every being would essentially have their own universe they can do whatever they want with. You can set up whatever rules and conditions you'd like. You can even make your universe look exactly like the one we live in right now. In this world, you also have the ability to limit your freedom of will and restrict your own will voluntarily whenever you want. Therefore, you can set up the world to be exactly like this one, where you're mortal and you have one life and you can experience suffering, or however you'd like. If you want, you can even enter the universes of other beings so long as they allow it and so long as you voluntarily restrict your own will to accommodate whatever laws they have set in that universe. In such a universe, all experiences, including suffering, are voluntary. Unfortunately, we do not live in such a world, so you may ask, well, what's the point of this morality? Can we use it to help us understand what actions we should and should not do in the real world? Yes, we can. Just like it's impossible for us to draw a perfect triangle in this world, because if you zoom in close enough, you'll see that the electrons go in little bubble shapes and it won't be possible to draw a perfectly straight line. We can still use the abstract idea of the triangle to draw something as close as possible in our world. Just like the analogy, we can use the abstract idea of this objective morality to guide us towards what is the correct or incorrect action based on whether it moves us closer or further away from this best of all possible worlds. A common question I've been asked is, well, what about disciplining kids? Isn't that an involuntary restriction on an unwilling participant? Yes, it is. That would be immoral based on this definition. However, because our world is not the best of all possible worlds, we have to do many immoral things in order to prevent even greater immoral things from happening. For example, disciplining children or eating meat. We discipline children so they don't run out into the street where nature will apply a much more harsh restriction. And we eat meat and kill animals because if we don't, we'll die from hunger. These would be examples of justified immoral actions, kind of like self-defense. They are still immoral and we should acknowledge them as immoral, but in some cases we have to do them because of the nature of the world in which we live. As we make technological advancements, such justified immoral actions may no longer be justified. As a final note, I wanted to talk about the free will defense. Theologians use the free will defense to say that an all-powerful, all-good God is not incompatible with suffering because he may have a justifiable reason for allowing it, namely free will. I don't actually know if free will is possible because from my understanding, either we do something for a reason, in which case it's determined, or we do it for no reason, in which case it's random, and no combination of those two things is going to get us free will. But let's, for the sake of argument, suppose it is possible. However, you should note from the model of morality I just presented, it is actually easily possible to have a world with free will and without involuntary suffering. All you need to do is make suffering optional, such as in the case of the best of all possible worlds for all possible wills. Therefore, the free will defense fails, because if an all-good, all-powerful God existed, he would have created this best of all possible worlds for all possible wills.